Hi, today I will be talking to you about the UFC. The UFC is a premium fight corporation owned by Dana White. It is a mixed martial arts contest in which fighters from all over the globe compete in different weight classes to prove who is the best fighter. Today I'll be talking about the stars of the UFC, a little bit of the history, and the current situation it is in. First up is Khabib Nurmagomedov. Khabib Nurmagomedov is a Russian superstar who quickly rose to stardom last year, defeating Conor McGregor. Him and Conor McGregor had a very intense rivalry, which there was a lot of trash talking in the build-up. Khabib quickly shut up all of the naysayers when he beat him. Next we'll be talking about Jon Bones Jones. Jon Bones Jones is considered the greatest fighter of all time. He rose to stardom as he became the youngest champion in UFC history, and has continued to dominate since. He won the belt when he was just 22 years old. He is still the UFC light heavyweight champion, and nothing looks to be changing in the future. Next we'll be talking about Jorge Masvidal, or Street Jesus as he's always so known. Jorge Masvidal rose to prominence recently after he owned the fastest knockout in UFC history over Ben Askren. He has been a terrifying force in the welterweight division, tearing up the competition, and is the BMF champion. He actually got The Rock to put the BMF belt around his waist. Next, we'll be talking about Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz. Conor McGregor is the biggest star the UFC has ever seen, and is also a very controversial one. He rose to prominence beating Jose Aldo in just 13 seconds. But Nate Diaz is also a massive star who rose to prominence after he beat Conor McGregor in a contested match. They had the rematch, which is arguably one of the greatest matches in UFC history, where both men put it all on the line for our entertainment. It was truly an amazing fight. Next, I'll be talking about Israel Adesanya, who is an undefeated middleweight champion. He has recent wins over Kelvin Gastelum, Robert Whittaker, and Yoel Romero. He finished Robert Whittaker in emphatic fashion to win the UFC middleweight championship in just the second round. He has had a lot of doubters over the last few years, but has won a UFC belt after only joining the UFC 2 years ago. These fighters all rose to stardom by a mix of luck, skill, and mic skills. All of these athletes have proven to be good on the mic in insulting their opponents and creating good build-up to a fight with trash talk, which seems to be the best chance of becoming a star in the UFC. Rather than skills, is trash talk. Believe it or not, the UFC is one of the only sports in the world to be still operating during the pandemic, as Dana White has a private island which he will host fights on called the UFC Fight Island. Now I will be going over the early days of the UFC. UFC 1 was held on November 12th, 1993. The event was broadcasted live on pay-per-view. It was an 8-man tournament where a cruiserweight boxing champion, a highly respected wrestler in Ken Shamrock, and even a sumo wrestler competed to win. But none of those ended up winning. The vastly undersized Royce Gracie, who practiced Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, overcame the odds and defeated all of the vastly larger opponents. He won by submission very quickly in all of his fights to become the winner of the first UFC tournament. UFC has evolved much since then, becoming much more mainstream, with stars Chuck Liddell, Conor McGregor, etc., boosting the sport up to astronomical levels. The UFC is a fantastic sport, which anything can happen in any fight due to the 4-ounce gloves. It is my favourite sport. This concludes my podcast. I would like to thank you for listening on my history of the UFC. Thank you.